Across barren valleys and sun-bleached plateaus, a quiet power gathered where others saw only wilderness. Traders followed familiar paths, marked not by borders, but by wells and shaded resting grounds. At key junctions, new settlements took shape, half open-air market, half sanctuary, where goods changed hands and strangers left with shared customs. Sandstone walls held both homes and rituals, their designs cut directly from cliff faces and worn smooth by time and wind. What looked like isolation was in fact connection. Roots threaded through every courtyard, every cistern, every carved facade. The Nabataeans did not announce themselves with armies. They built a network that thrived where kingdoms faltered, grounded in geography, water, and trust. And in the silence of the open land, their choices reshaped what it meant to endure. Beyond the scorching flatlands, where mirages dance like phantoms above sun-baked stone, the granite peaks of northwestern Arabia thrust skyward like the spears of forgotten gods. Here, where the wilderness breathes with furnace heat and the very air shimmers with intensity that would break lesser men, a people emerges who will reshape the ancient world's understanding of commerce, diplomacy, and survival. They call themselves Nabatu, the ones who dig, and their name will echo through the corridors of power from Rome's marble halls to Persia's golden palaces. The land itself speaks of divine selection. While other peoples depend upon rivers that may fail, or rains that may refuse to fall, these children of the wilderness read water's secret language written in stone. Every cliff face becomes a manuscript revealing where precious moisture gathers in hidden cisterns. Each rocky outcrop tells stories of underground streams that flow through chambers no enemy can find or poison. The very harshness that drives other clans away becomes their fortress, their sanctuary, their source of power that no adversary can challenge. From wind-carved defiles where eagles nest and silence reigns absolute, trails snake downward toward distant shores where the Red Sea pounds against volcanic rock. These pathways, worn smooth by countless generations of feet, both human and animal, connect highland strongholds to coastal harbors, where ships arrive bearing treasures from lands beyond imagination. Along these passages, prosperity flows like blood through arteries, carrying abundance to communities that understand exchange as intimately as they understand survival. Through seasons of plenty and years of drought, the scattered clans learn lessons that will serve them when they face the legions of empires. Collection of precious moisture becomes an art requiring patience, intelligence, and intimate understanding of terrain that reveals its secrets only to those born among its peaks and valleys. Every rainfall gets captured in systems of channels and basins that transform brief storms into permanent reserves. These marvels, invisible to casual observation, create oases of plenty and landscapes that appear barren to outsiders. As the mountains rise, unyielding around them, so too do the people grow steadfast. Their children learn to move across broken terrain with the grace of cats, their endurance forged by altitude that leaves lowland warriors gasping for breath they cannot find. Women who can carry vessels up cliff faces that would challenge trained climbers become mothers to sons who treat impossible ascents as afternoon walks. Men who track game across boulder fields where a single misstep means death develop skills that will make them guides more valuable than the treasures they protect. Yet these are not simple nomads, following ancient patterns without thought or purpose. In councils where leaders gather under stars that blaze with crystalline clarity, decisions emerge that reveal sophisticated understanding of politics, economics, and strategy. Alliances form and dissolve like morning mist, as circumstances change and opportunities arise. Marriage bonds create networks spanning hundreds of miles. their implications calculated with precision that would impress diplomats from more settled realms. Expeditions become their universities, mobile centers of learning, where young men acquire knowledge that no palace school could provide. Languages merge and blend as merchants from distant lands share information around evening fires. Navigation techniques that enable journeys across trackless wastes pass from experienced guides to eager apprentices who understand that accurate directions mean the difference between profit and death. Practices that ensure fair exchange while protecting against fraud develop through trial and error that leaves no room for mistakes. The Kedarite Confederation, once masters of these passages, finds its ancient dominance challenged by peoples who possess advantages that traditional power cannot overcome. Where older clans relied upon strength to control commerce, these newcomers offer services that make their protection indispensable. Their understanding of hidden springs enables expedition leaders to attempt journeys previously considered suicidal. Their connections provide safe passage through territories controlled by hostile forces. Most crucially, their reputation for honoring agreements creates trust that transforms dangerous ventures into profitable enterprises. Bitumen harvesting from the Dead Sea's shores provides income that supplements traditional sources of abundance. This black substance, essential for Egyptian mummification practices, commands prices that rival precious metals in international markets. The techniques required for extraction and transport across difficult terrain become closely guarded secrets that pass only between trusted family members. Processing methods that purify the raw material into products, meeting specific requirements developed through generations of experimentation and refinement. Copper flows from mines, hidden in peaks where working conditions test human endurance beyond reasonable limits. Miners who descend into tunnels carved from living rock face dangers that include cave-ins, toxic gases, and underground flooding that can trap entire work crews. Yet the metal they extract, pure, malleable, perfect for crafting tools and weapons, justifies risks that would terrify men from safer occupations. The smelting expertise that transforms ore into useful products requires skills passed down through bloodlines sworn to secrecy. Pearls arrive from Persian Gulf waters through networks that span wildernesses and connect highland strongholds to distant shores. These lustrous treasures, formed in oyster shells beneath waves that never touch Arabian sands, reach upland markets through arrangements that demonstrate sophistication rivaling anything known in established kingdoms. The quality standards that distinguish valuable specimens from inferior products require expertise that develops through years of careful study and practical experience. From Neo-Babylonian scribes come the first written references to peoples who operate beyond the reach of imperial administration, yet somehow influence events within territories that acknowledge royal authority. Cuneiform tablets record negotiations with leaders whose names appear briefly in official documents before vanishing back into anonymity. These fragmentary mentions, preserved in archives that will survive the empires that created them, provide glimpses of complexity that challenges assumptions about nomadic simplicity. Greek authors who encounter these peoples through coastal posts write descriptions that blend admiration with bewilderment. How can clans that appear to live like primitive nomads demonstrate acumen that outmaneuvers sophisticated merchants from established cities? The answers lie in organization that combines loyalty with entrepreneurial flexibility, creating communities that function as extended families while operating as efficient business enterprises. Competition with Edomites, Moabites, and Arameans transforms from occasional skirmishing into systematic campaigns for control of passages that determine regional prosperity. Each group possesses advantages that others lack. The Edomites control passes, the Moabites command agricultural valleys, the Arameans dominate urban centers. Victory requires not just superiority, but comprehensive strategies that address economic, administrative, and diplomatic dimensions of conflict. Raqmu, the place that later ages will call Petra, begins its transformation from seasonal encampment to permanent stronghold. The massive amphitheater of rose-red cliffs provides natural fortification that 1,000 engineers could not improve. Springs that flow year-round from hidden sources ensure supplies sufficient for populations far larger than any previous settlement. Most importantly, the location commands approaches from 4 directions, enabling control of passages that connect Syria to Arabia, Egypt to Mesopotamia. Early development in this natural fortress demonstrates capabilities that surpass anything contemporary peoples achieve in similar environments. Channels carved into cliff faces direct rainwater towards cisterns, whose capacity defies calculation by casual observers. Staircases cut from solid rock provide access to defensive positions that render traditional siege tactics futile. Storage chambers hollowed from hearts create magazines that could supply forces through years of conflict. Sacred spaces take shape as communities that gather for purposes begin to develop institutions that serve permanent populations. Altars carved from single blocks provide focal points for ceremonies that blend traditional worship with influences absorbed from international contacts. Priests who serve these highland sanctuaries master ritual wisdom that incorporates practices learned from Egyptian temples, Arabian shrines, and Mesopotamian ziggurats. Seasonal patterns that govern nomadic life gradually yield to settled rhythms that support specialized occupations. Farmers who once followed herds across seasonal grazing grounds establish permanent fields in valleys where irrigation enables reliable harvests. Craftsmen who previously worked only during intervals between migrations set up workshops where they can pursue their skills throughout the year. Dealers who formerly limited their activities to specific seasons discover that permanent bases enable year-round operations. Structures evolve as communities grow beyond sizes that traditional organization can effectively govern. Council systems that worked well for extended families require modification to address conflicts between groups that lack kinship bonds. Legal frameworks that relied upon customary practices must adapt to situations that custom never anticipated. Leadership patterns that emphasized personal authority based on proven competence develop institutional forms that can survive the death or departure of individual chiefs. Synthesis begins as peoples from different backgrounds learn to cooperate in enterprises that benefit everyone involved. Language borrowing that starts with vocabulary extends to concepts of law, spirituality, and organization. Marriage customs that unite families also create alliances that strengthen communities against external threats. Artistic traditions that once reflected purely local preferences begin incorporating motifs learned from visitors. Organization advances beyond the hit-and-run tactics that served scattered groups. Permanent settlements require defensive strategies that can protect fixed positions against enemies who possess siege equipment and technical expertise. Weapons development that once focused on mobility and concealment must address the requirements of positional combat, where victory depends upon superior arms and armor. Training programs that emphasized individual prowess begin to stress coordinated movement and disciplined formation fighting. Early confrontations push these evolving capabilities to the limit against adversaries armed with the brilliance of Hellenistic thought. Antigonus I, that calculating successor to Alexander, whose ambitions encompass dominion over all the lands that the great conqueror touched, dispatches expeditions intended to bring these troublesome peoples under Macedonian control. His generals carry with them the confidence that comes from victories over Persian satraps and Egyptian pharaohs. The initial invasion that strikes at the heart of their territory in 312 BC brings forces equipped with siege engines, cavalry squadrons, and professional infantry trained in techniques that conquered the known world. Yet when these legions penetrate the strongholds, they discover that traditional advantages mean nothing in terrain where springs determine survival and local expertise provides unassailable benefit. Attacks that succeed brilliantly on open battlefields founder against defenses that make every cliff face a fortress. Heat that Macedonian soldiers cannot endure becomes an ally more valuable than reinforcements. Their bronze armor, perfect for Mediterranean climates, transforms into furnaces that cook men inside their own protection. Supplies that seemed adequate for brief campaigns prove insufficient for operations that extend beyond carefully calculated limits. Most devastatingly, supply lines that stretch across hostile territory become vulnerable to raids by enemies who strike from hiding places no army can locate. Counterattacks that harass withdrawal demonstrate tactical sophistication that catches veteran commanders completely off guard. These are not desperate charges by primitive fighters, but carefully coordinated operations that exploit every weakness in enemy formations. Archery that picks off stragglers and support personnel while avoiding direct confrontation with main forces. Night raids that target supply columns and communications networks. Ambushes that channel enemy movement into killing zones where superior numbers become liability rather than advantage. The disaster that befalls Antigonus's second expedition in 311 BC provides lessons that echo through academies for generations. Professional soldiers trained in the finest schools of their age find themselves outmaneuvered by fighters who learned combat in a classroom where mistakes mean death. Equipment that conquered Persian forces proves useless against tactics that no civilized enemy would employ. The survivors who eventually reach friendly territory carry with them reports that transform regional understanding of capabilities. Victory in combat is just part of the larger success these first clashes bring. More importantly, successful resistance against Hellenistic aggression establishes precedents that will influence international relations for centuries. These are not conquered subjects who must accept domination, but independent peoples whose strength commands respect from the greatest forces of their age. Recognition that follows success opens possibilities for alliance and cooperation that pure nomadism could never achieve. Advantages that flow from demonstrated competence multiply the economic benefits that control of passages already provides. Merchant expeditions that previously paid protection money to multiple groups find that dealing with unified leadership reduces both costs and risks. International dealers who once avoided these paths because of security concerns discover that new guarantees make previously dangerous journeys not just safe, but profitable. Developments that accompany consolidation reflect growing sophistication in communities that must address spiritual needs of diverse populations. Shrines that once served purely local purposes expand their functions to accommodate worshippers who travel from distant territories. Festivals that marked seasonal changes in nomadic life evolve into celebrations that unite settled populations around shared observances. Sacred texts that preserve traditions in oral form begin to acquire written forms that ensure more accurate transmission. Education that trains leaders for increasingly complex responsibilities creates networks of learned men whose influence extends far beyond matters of faith. These scholars master writing systems that enable communication with courts and partners. Their libraries preserve not just sacred wisdom, but practical information about law, medicine, agriculture, and techniques that serves entire communities. Most crucially, their schools train the administrators and negotiators who will govern the expanding realm. Innovation that transforms temporary shelters into permanent structures demonstrates mastery of building techniques that rival achievements of established civilizations. Workshops that once moved with seasonal migrations establish fixed locations where craftsmen can pursue complex projects, requiring months or years of concentrated effort. Public buildings that serve community needs begin to display artistic sophistication that reflects both local traditions and influences absorbed through international contacts. Pottery production that once emphasized utility above all other considerations begins to incorporate decorative elements that transform ordinary vessels into works of art. The techniques required for creating containers so thin they seem to glow when held against light, developed through experiments that combine traditional wisdom with innovations learned from craftsmen. These ceramic masterpieces become goods in their own right, their quality establishing reputations that open new markets throughout the region. Textile manufacture that supplies basic clothing needs for growing populations evolves into industries capable of producing luxury fabrics that command premium prices in international markets. Dyes extracted from plants and mineral sources create colors that cannot be duplicated elsewhere. Weaving techniques that blend different fibers produce textiles whose quality rivals products from famous manufacturing centers. The workshops that create these goods become centers of innovation, where traditional skills merge with new techniques. Metalworking that begins with simple tools and weapons advances to produce decorative objects whose artistic merit equals their practical value. Bronze casting that requires precise temperature control and alloy expertise develops through generations of experimentation and refinement. Silver working that transforms raw metal into jewelry and ceremonial vessels demonstrates craftsmanship that attracts customers from distant markets. The reputation for quality that these products establish creates demand that drives further technological advancement. By the final decades of the 4th century, transformation from scattered groups to unified entity approaches completion. Leaders who once commanded only their immediate followers now coordinate activities across territories that span hundreds of miles. Communities that began as seasonal encampments have grown into permanent towns, whose populations pursue specialized occupations. Most importantly, the reputation for competence in combat, commerce, and negotiation has established these peoples as forces that must be consulted rather than conquered. The stage stands prepared for the next act in this drama of transformation. Unity that enables coordination of resources across vast territories. Networks that connect highland strongholds to markets throughout the known world. Capabilities that can defend interests against any enemy while projecting power across strategic regions. Institutions that preserve identity while enabling adaptation to changing circumstances. What emerges from these centuries of gradual development will astound observers who remember when these lands knew only scattered nomads, following ancient patterns without apparent purpose or direction. The realm that rises from foundations will claim equality with empires whose histories stretch back to legendary antiquity. Kings who trace their authority to councils will negotiate as equals with Caesars and Shahs whose crowns rest upon the accomplishments of countless predecessors. Dawn breaks over a transformed landscape, where rose-red cliffs echo with sounds that would have astounded previous generations. The ring of hammers against chisels mingles with the grinding of wheels upon stone as permanent dwellings rise where once only seasonal shelters marked the changing seasons. Rakmu, the place where caravans converge like streams flowing toward the sea, spreads across its natural amphitheatre with the confidence of a settlement destined for greatness that will outlast the empires of its age. On carved steps rising toward the sacred heights, King Aretas I leaves his mark, his name written in a script shaped by both local tradition and distant exchange. Below him, the capital unfolds like a jewel set in granite, its expanding quarters housing communities drawn from across the known world by promises of abundance and protection that only unified authority can provide. This is no longer the refuge of scattered clans, but the beating heart of a domain whose reach spreads like ripples across the ancient world's consciousness. Transformation manifests itself in every corner of the expanding metropolis, where herders once penned their animals during brief respites from nomadic wandering. Workshops now produce goods whose quality commands premium prices in markets from Damascus to Alexandria. Potters shape clay into vessels so delicate they seem spun from moonlight, their surfaces bearing patterns that speak of artistic sophistication, rivaling anything created in the great manufacturing centers. These masterpieces, thin as eggshells yet strong as bronze, become ambassadors that carry the nation's reputation to courts where connoisseurs appreciate excellence. The script that emerges from Aramaic roots takes on distinctly local characteristics as scribes adapt foreign letters to express sounds and concepts unique to their evolving culture. Stone inscriptions that record sovereign decrees demonstrate growing confidence in governmental frameworks that can address complex bureaucratic challenges. Archives that preserve correspondence with distant authorities fill chambers carved from living rock, their contents revealing diplomatic sophistication that commands respect from chancelleries accustomed to dealing only with established powers. Sacred symbols etched into cliff faces proclaim spiritual authority that transcends temporal dominion. The gods who watch over these people, deities whose names echo through mountain defiles and whose energy flows like underground streams, receive homage in sanctuaries that blend traditional worship with architectural innovations learned from foreign contacts. Altars carved from single granite blocks provide focal points for ceremonies that unite diverse groups through shared devotion. Marvels of hydraulic design that channel precious rainwater through networks of unprecedented complexity demonstrate technological capabilities that surpass achievements of contemporary civilizations. Channels cut with mathematical precision direct seasonal floods toward reservoirs, whose capacity ensures survival through years of drought. Dams built with techniques that marry theoretical knowledge to practical necessity transform brief storms into permanent abundance. These triumphs, largely invisible to casual observers, create the foundation upon which urban expansion rests. Hegra emerges as the northern anchor of expanding authority, its strategic position commanding approaches from Syria, while providing bases for operations that extend dominance deep into Arabian territories. This secondary center, carved from sandstone cliffs that glow like gold in evening light, demonstrates governing wisdom that recognizes the impossibility of controlling vast domains from a single location. Provincial governors who answer directly to sovereign oversight establish courts that mirror the sophistication of the southern capital while adapting to local conditions and requirements. Currency that bears monarchical images begins to circulate through networks that span continents, its weight and purity guaranteed by oversight that maintains foreign confidence. golden specimens that carry the sovereign's likeness to markets throughout the Mediterranean world, serve as ambassadors whose mere existence proclaims the nation's abundance and stability. Silver pieces that facilitate smaller transactions enable exchange to flourish at every level of society. Bronze coins that serve daily needs create monetary frameworks whose sophistication rivals anything developed by older powers. The Celius affair reveals both the opportunities and dangers that accompany growing global prominence. This ambitious minister, whose intelligence and cunning earn him positions of trust within the sovereign administration, attempts to manipulate Roman policies to serve his own vision of Arabian destiny. His schemes, involving marriage bonds with Herodian dynasties and territorial negotiations that promise to reshape regional boundaries, demonstrate the level of sophistication that characterizes court politics during this era of expansion. When these machinations collapse under the weight of their own complexity, the consequences reverberate through chancelleries from Rome to the rose-red capital. Sylleus himself pays the ultimate price for overreaching ambition, his execution in Roman custody serving as a warning to others who might confuse personal advancement with national interest. Yet the very fact that a provincial minister could shape imperial policies demonstrates the respect that Arabian wisdom commands in the highest circles of global politics. Roman attempts to control Arabian exchange through direct intervention meet with disasters that humble the legion's pride, while confirming the futility of conquering peoples who possess advantages that martial science cannot overcome. Aelius Gallus, leading forces equipped with the finest weapons and trained in techniques that conquered Gaul and Britain, discovers that wilderness campaigns require expertise that no European education provides. His expedition, intended to secure incense sources and establish permanent Roman presence in Arabia, becomes a cautionary tale of imperial overreach. Their failure in regions built to resist outsiders serves as a quiet testament to the strength of choosing unity over force. Guides who lead Romans astray through trackless wastes that stretch beyond horizons. Wells that yield only bitter water that torments rather than refreshes exhausted troops. Attacks that strike from concealment before melting away like mirages, leaving behind only casualties and growing demoralization. Survivors who eventually struggle back to familiar territories carry reports that transform Roman understanding of Arabian capabilities. These are not primitive nomads who can be intimidated by displays of organized force, but sophisticated opponents whose mastery of their environment renders traditional martial advantages meaningless. The respect that grows from this hard-won knowledge creates foundations for relationships based on mutual benefit rather than subordination. The mountain capital's transformation into a cosmopolitan center reflects the confidence that comes from demonstrated strength and growing abundance. Streets that once echoed only with the footsteps of local inhabitants now resonate with conversations conducted in languages from across the known world. Egyptian merchants who arrive bearing papyrus and exotic perfumes mingle with Syrian dealers offering fine textiles and worked silver. Indian ambassadors who travel overland through Mesopotamian territories negotiate agreements that will carry Arabian goods to markets beyond the Ganges. Bureaucratic quarters that house the expanding administration required for governing distant provinces demonstrate governmental sophistication that rivals anything achieved by older empires. Scribes who master multiple languages enable communication with subjects whose diversity would challenge any governing framework. Tax collectors who understand both local customs and imperial requirements ensure steady revenues without provoking rebellions that could destabilize the nation. Provincial correspondence that coordinates policies across vast distances creates unity of purpose despite geographical fragmentation. Architectural innovations that blend Hellenistic facades with indigenous building traditions produce structures whose beauty astonishes visitors while serving practical needs of urban expansion. Temples whose carved surfaces tell stories of divine favor and sovereign achievement provide gathering places for communities that must somehow unite groups drawn from across the ancient world. Palaces whose reception halls can accommodate embassies from distant courts demonstrate the abundance and sophistication that command global respect. Urban planning that organizes neighborhoods according to occupational specialties creates efficient frameworks for production and distribution of goods. Metalworking districts where the ring of hammers never ceases produce tools, weapons, and decorative objects whose quality establishes reputations that spread throughout trading networks. Textile quarters where looms work continuously create fabrics whose patterns and colors cannot be duplicated elsewhere. Pottery workshops where artisans shape clay into forms of unprecedented delicacy supply vessels whose beauty transforms ordinary meals into ceremonial occasions. Hydraulic networks that serve growing urban communities represent achievements that rival the aqueducts of Rome. Channels that bring spring water from distant sources through mountain tunnels whose construction defies easy explanation. Distribution frameworks that ensure adequate supplies reach every neighborhood while maintaining pressure sufficient for fountains and public baths. Drainage conduits that prevent flooding during seasonal rains while preserving precious moisture for periods of scarcity. Residential districts that accommodate merchants, craftsmen, and administrators reflect social stratification that emerges as the community grows beyond tribal organization. Wealthy quarters where successful dealers build houses whose luxury rivals anything found in Alexandria or Antioch. Middle districts where skilled artisans establish workshops that combine living spaces with places of business. Modest neighborhoods where laborers and servants find housing that provides dignity and security while remaining affordable for those whose earnings come from daily wages. Marketplace organization that facilitates exchange between local producers and foreign buyers demonstrates sophistication that makes the capital an essential stop for any serious merchant. Regulations that ensure honest weights and measures while protecting against fraud create confidence that encourages investment and expansion. Dispute resolution mechanisms that can address conflicts between parties who speak different languages and follow different customs enable complex transactions that might otherwise prove impossible. Diplomatic relations that extend sovereign reach throughout the region reflect growing confidence in the nation's ability to project authority and protect interests across vast distances. Treaties negotiated with Hasmonean leaders establish boundaries and arrangements that benefit all parties while preventing conflicts that could disrupt abundance. Compacts with tribal groups that control strategic territories create networks of mutual obligation that strengthen security while extending dominance. Marriage politics that unite the sovereign family with prominent lineages throughout the region create kinship bonds that facilitate cooperation while deterring aggression. Princesses whose weddings cement partnerships with neighboring forces become ambassadors whose presence in foreign courts ensures favorable consideration of their homeland's interests. Princes whose marriages bring exotic brides to the capital demonstrate the global recognition that the nation commands while adding new elements to the cultural synthesis that characterizes court life. Recognition that acknowledges sovereign authority as legitimate and permanent manifests itself in various forms that confirm the transformation from tribal confederation to independent state. Roman acknowledgement of Arabian independence through treaties that recognize territorial integrity while establishing frameworks for exchange cooperation. Persian respect that treats diplomatic envoys as equals in negotiations that affect regional balance. Egyptian agreements that guarantee safe passage for merchants while establishing mechanisms for resolving disputes. Legal frameworks that govern increasingly complex societies must address situations that traditional tribal customs never anticipated. Property laws that define ownership rights in urban settings, where land values create fortunes that earlier generations could never have imagined. Codes that regulate transactions between parties who follow different spiritual traditions and speak different languages. Criminal justice that maintains order in cosmopolitan communities, where diverse groups must somehow coexist peacefully. To ready youth for roles within an ever-widening world, education must extend past the limits of what was once taught through tribal practice, oral tradition, and ancestral example. Language instruction that enables communication with peoples from across the known world. Mathematical education that supports calculations and projects. Legal training that prepares administrators to govern diverse groups according to principles that blend traditional wisdom with innovations required by changing circumstances. Spiritual developments that accompany territorial expansion reflect the need to accommodate diverse traditions while maintaining unity of purpose. Sanctuaries that serve communities drawn from different backgrounds must somehow reconcile conflicting beliefs without compromising essential principles. Festivals that mark important occasions in the ceremonial calendar provide opportunities for diverse groups to participate in shared celebrations. Pilgrimage sites that attract visitors from distant territories become sources of revenue while strengthening bonds. Organization that protects expanding territories while projecting authority across strategic regions requires professional forces whose capabilities exceed anything that tribal levies could provide. Infantry regiments trained in formation, fighting, that can defend fixed positions against siege warfare. Cavalry squadrons whose mobility enables rapid response to threats that might emerge anywhere within vast domains. Specialized units whose expertise in particular forms of combat provides capabilities that standard forces cannot match. Weapons development that equips these professional forces reflects technological advancement that incorporates innovations from across the ancient world. Metallurgical techniques that produce blades whose edges hold their sharpness through countless battles. Armor designs that provide protection while allowing freedom of movement essential for operations. Siege equipment that can reduce fortifications while remaining mobile enough for rapid deployment across difficult terrain. Naval capabilities that enable operations across the Red Sea demonstrate growing ambitions that extend beyond terrestrial dominions. Warships whose design incorporates lessons learned from encounters with Egyptian, Ethiopian, and Arabian vessels. Navigation techniques that enable operations far from familiar shores while maintaining ability to return safely to home ports. Naval bases that provide secure harbors for fleets while controlling strategic waterways. Expansion that carries goods to markets throughout the known world creates fortunes that fund governmental ambitions while establishing connections that strengthen security. Incense from southern Arabian sources that commands prices rivaling precious metals in Mediterranean markets. Exotic spices that transform ordinary meals into luxury experiences for those who can afford such refinements. Precious stones whose beauty captures the imagination of wealthy collectors throughout the ancient world. Quality control that maintains reputation for excellence ensures continued demand for goods in competitive global markets. inspection protocols that guarantee authenticity while preventing inferior products from damaging relationships, standards that define acceptable quality levels while providing incentives for continued improvement, trademark protection that prevents counterfeiting while preserving market advantages that superior craftsmanship creates, transportation networks that move goods efficiently across vast distances demonstrate logistical capabilities that rival anything achieved by contemporary forces, caravan organization that ensures safe passage through territories controlled by potentially hostile elements, supply stations that provide rest and resupply facilities while maintaining security against bandit attacks, communication frameworks that coordinate movements across multiple paths while providing early warning of potential problems, financial institutions that support expanding exchange, create banking services that facilitate complex transactions across boundaries, credit frameworks that enable merchants to operate without carrying dangerous amounts of precious metals, exchange mechanisms that convert between different monetary standards while maintaining confidence in value, investment opportunities that channel surplus funds into productive enterprises that benefit entire communities. Cultural synthesis that characterizes court life reflects the cosmopolitan character that territorial expansion creates. Artistic traditions that blend local customs with elements absorbed from foreign contacts. Literary developments that preserve indigenous wisdom while incorporating outside knowledge. Musical innovations that combine traditional melodies with instruments and techniques learned from distant masters. As the 1st century before the Common Era approaches, the transformation from nomadic confederation to territorial state stands complete. Sovereign authority that commands respect from Rome's senators and Persia's nobles. Governmental frameworks that control diverse groups across vast distances. Networks that connect mountain strongholds to markets throughout the ancient world. Capabilities that can defend national interests while projecting force wherever circumstances require. The stage stands prepared for the golden age that awaits, when sovereign ambitions will reach their zenith under monarchs whose vision encompasses dominance over the crossroads where 3 continents meet. The foundations that centuries of patient development have created will support achievements that astound observers, while establishing the nation among the great forces of antiquity. Soon, very soon, the name that once belonged only to wanderers will command respect in every court and market where civilized men gather to shape the destiny of nations. Across the rose-red amphitheater, where morning light transforms carved cliffs into walls of fire, the greatest age in Arabian history unfolds like a scroll written by the gods themselves. Here, where ancient waters carved galleries through living stone, and eagles soar between peaks crowned with eternal mist, a dominion reaches toward its destined zenith. The name of Aratus III echoes through marble halls from Damascus to Rome, carried on the voices of ambassadors who speak of a wilderness sovereign whose realm stretches from the Red Sea's burning shores to the olive groves of distant Syria. Within chambers where lamplight flickers against surfaces that shimmer like captured starlight, the monarch receives tribute from territories whose diversity would challenge any administrator's imagination. Caravans bearing frankincense from hidden valleys arrive simultaneously, with delegations carrying pearls from Gulf waters that never know winter's touch. Ethiopian ivory mingles with Indian silks, while Persian carpets cushion floors where Chinese jade rests beside Baltic amber. This convergence of treasures from 3 continents transforms the mountain stronghold into a marketplace where the world's riches gather like streams flowing toward an inland sea. The northward push that brings Damascus under Arabian authority represents more than conquest. It embodies the triumph of wilderness wisdom over urban sophistication. Alexander Jannaeus, that fierce Hasmonean whose prowess has secured Judean independence against Syrian pressure, finds his own ambitions checked by forces that emerge from landscapes he dismissed as worthless wasteland. The siege that unfolds beneath Jerusalem's walls demonstrates how quickly regional balances can shift when new players enter the great game of Mediterranean politics. Obodas I, whose victory over the Hasmonean champion establishes his reputation as a warrior king worthy of epic poetry, employs tactics that would bewilder generals trained in conventional warfare, wilderness fighters who strike like lightning before vanishing into terrain that swallows pursuing armies whole, supply lines that stretch across impossible distances, yet somehow deliver provisions exactly when and circumstances require, intelligence networks that penetrate enemy councils while remaining invisible to counter-espionage efforts that would expose ordinary spies. The triumph that crowns these campaigns extends far beyond battlefield success to encompass diplomatic achievements that reshape the entire Eastern Mediterranean's political landscape. Roman recognition of Arabian independence through treaties that acknowledge sovereign integrity while establishing frameworks for peaceful coexistence. Persian respect that treats wilderness ambassadors as equals in negotiations affecting regional stability. Egyptian agreements that guarantee access while providing mutual defense arrangements against common threats. Maritime operations that project Arabian authority across Red Sea waters demonstrate capabilities that few contemporary observers thought possible for a landlocked nation. Warships whose design incorporates lessons learned from encounters with Egyptian, Ethiopian, and Persian vessels patrol shipping lanes that carry the world's most valuable cargoes. Naval bases carved from coastal cliffs provide secure harbors while controlling strategic passages that connect 3 continents. Admiralty skills that enable operations far from familiar shores while maintaining supply lines across dangerous waters. Setting up trading stations on Socotra Island, the fabled land of frankincense and myrrh that sends temples from Babylon to Britain, marks the high point of seafaring dreams that started with simple fishing boats. Here, where monsoon winds carry ships between Indian Ocean ports and Red Sea harbors, Arabian merchants establish warehouses that serve as collection points for goods flowing between Asia and Europe. The profits that flow from this strategic position fund projects while demonstrating the wisdom of those who think beyond traditional boundaries. Hegra blossoms into a metropolis whose splendor rivals anything achieved in the southern stronghold, its sandstone monuments rising like prayers carved in gold-colored stone. The governing center that controls northern territories demonstrates sophistication that enables effective oversight over populations whose diversity would challenge any bureaucratic structure. Provincial courts that blend local customs with imperial law create justice frameworks that maintain order while respecting traditional practices. Tax collection mechanisms that generate steady revenues without provoking rebellions show the delicate balance required for successful governance. Bosra emerges as the westernmost anchor of expanding dominion, its strategic position commanding approaches from Roman Syria, while providing bases for operations that extend influence deep into Palestinian territories. The transformation of this ancient trading post into a major center demonstrates the vision that guides imperial growth, urban planning that accommodates diverse populations while maintaining security against external threats, regulations that facilitate exchange while protecting local producers from unfair competition, currency that bears the images and inscriptions of wilderness monarchs, circulates throughout trading networks that span the ancient world. its quality and consistency establishing Arabian monetary standards as acceptable medium of exchange in markets from Alexandria to Antioch. Golden specimens whose artistic sophistication rivals anything produced in older mints carry portraits to courts where connoisseurs appreciate both aesthetic merit and economic reliability. Silver pieces whose weight accuracy enables complex calculations facilitate transactions that might otherwise require unwieldy barter arrangements. Bronze coins, whose durability ensures long service life, create confidence in monetary frameworks that support expanding exchange. Coinage innovations that incorporate multiple scripts demonstrate the cosmopolitan character that growth creates. Greek inscriptions that enable communication with Hellenistic courts appear alongside Aramaic text that serves local populations. Latin phrases that acknowledge Roman importance complement Arabian characters that preserve indigenous identity. These multilingual specimens become ambassadors whose very existence proclaims the cultural synthesis that characterizes wilderness civilization at its zenith. Public inscriptions that record achievements in stone that will endure until mountains themselves crumble provide permanent archives of accomplishments that no enemy can erase or time diminish. Victory monuments that celebrate triumphs over Hasmonean armies stand beside dedications that honor peaceful negotiations with Roman authorities. Building records that document construction projects preserve technical knowledge while demonstrating the scope of imperial ambitions. Legal codes carved into cliff faces ensure that future generations will understand the principles that guided governmental policies. Monumental building that rivals the greatest achievements of contemporary civilizations transforms the mountain stronghold into a showcase worthy of global attention. Temples whose facades blend Hellenistic sophistication with indigenous traditions create worship spaces that accommodate diverse spiritual needs while maintaining structural unity. Palaces whose reception halls can host embassies from distant courts demonstrate the luxury that successful governance makes possible. Amphitheaters carved from living rock provide entertainment venues while showcasing the technical capabilities that enable such ambitious projects. The Great Treasury, that masterpiece of rock-cut design, whose rose-red facade seems to glow within a fire, embodies the artistic synthesis that characterizes Arabian civilization during its golden age. Corinthian columns, whose proportions follow classical mathematical principles, support pediments decorated with motifs that speak to local traditions. Carved details that incorporate influences from Egyptian, Persian, and Mesopotamian sources create decorative programs that appeal to global audiences while maintaining distinctly Arabian character. Interior chambers whose acoustic properties amplify spoken words transform ordinary conversations into oracular pronouncements. Tomb construction that provides eternal homes for leaders whose earthly achievements deserve immortal commemoration, demonstrates both the abundance and artistic sophistication that imperial success makes possible. Underground chambers carved from solid rock create burial spaces whose grandeur exceeds anything achieved by contemporary dynasties. Carved facades that tell stories of accomplishments in visual languages that transcend literacy barriers. Grave goods filled with treasures from across the known world reveal the vast networks that once connected distant lands. Hydraulic engineering that supplies growing urban populations with adequate water represents technological achievement that rivals the aqueducts of Rome while surpassing them in efficiency and elegance. The SEQ Dam, that marvel of hydraulic design that controls seasonal floods while preserving precious moisture for periods of scarcity, demonstrates mastery of mathematical principles that few contemporary engineers possessed. Distribution systems that ensure adequate supplies reach every neighborhood, while maintaining pressure sufficient for fountains and public baths. Storage facilities whose capacity enables survival through extended droughts that would devastate less prepared communities. Urban water management that serves populations far larger than any previous settlement in the region creates sanitation standards that promote public health while supporting the dense habitation that characterizes major centers. Drainage networks that prevent flooding during seasonal rains while channeling runoff towards storage facilities. Sewage systems that remove waste without contaminating drinking water supplies. Public fountains that provide gathering places while demonstrating the abundance that successful governance creates. Social stratification that emerges as communities grow beyond tribal organization reflects the complexity that characterizes any sophisticated civilization. Merchant princes whose connections generate fortunes that enable lifestyles rivaling anything known in Alexandria or Antioch. Professional classes whose specialized knowledge serves governmental and business needs that tribal traditions never anticipated. Artisan guilds whose technical expertise creates products whose quality establishes reputations that spread throughout trading networks. Agricultural populations whose productivity feeds urban centers while generating surpluses that support non-productive occupations. The emergence of a cosmopolitan elite whose education and sophistication enable participation in cultural exchanges demonstrates the transformative effects of growth. Court scholars whose libraries preserve texts in multiple languages while contributing original works to intellectual traditions that span continents. Diplomatic corps whose linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge enable negotiations with representatives from diverse civilizations. Bureaucratic cadre whose organizational skills coordinate activities across territories, whose diversity would challenge any governmental structure. Legal innovations that address situations traditional tribal law never contemplated create jurisprudential frameworks that serve diverse populations while maintaining essential principles of justice. Property codes that define ownership rights in urban settings, where land values create wealth that earlier generations could never have imagined. Business law that regulates transactions between parties who follow different spiritual traditions and speak different languages. Criminal justice systems that maintain order in cosmopolitan communities, where diverse cultures must somehow coexist peacefully. Women's legal status that grants property rights and inheritance privileges unavailable in most contemporary civilizations demonstrates the progressive character that distinguishes Arabian society from more conservative neighbors. Female merchants whose business acumen enables independent operation in global markets. Property owners whose holdings include real estate and enterprises. Inheritors whose legal claims receive judicial protection that ensures economic security for widows and daughters. Marriage customs that unite families while creating political bonds reflect the sophisticated diplomacy that characterizes relations between prominent lineages. Wedding negotiations that involve considerations of control, advantage, and strategic cooperation transform private ceremonies into affairs of state. Dowry arrangements that transfer substantial wealth while establishing kinship networks that facilitate business relationships. Marriages that create bonds between Arabian nobility and houses throughout the region. Spiritual practices that accommodate diverse traditions while maintaining social unity demonstrate the tolerance that enables successful governance of multicultural populations. Synthesis that blends indigenous Arabian deities with gods worshipped by immigrant communities creates pantheons that serve everyone's needs while avoiding conflicts that could tear society apart. Festivals that mark important occasions in ceremonial calendars provide opportunities for diverse groups to participate in shared celebrations. pilgrimage sites that attract visitors from distant territories become sources of revenue while strengthening cultural bonds. Dushara, the supreme deity whose mountain throne overlooks the stronghold, like a divine guardian watching over earthly affairs, receives homage in ceremonies that unite populations drawn from across the ancient world. Altars carved from single granite blocks provide focal points for rituals that blend traditional wilderness worship with sophisticated theological concepts learned from global contacts. Priests whose education encompasses multiple traditions serve diverse congregations while maintaining doctrinal coherence. Sacred texts that preserve ancient wisdom while incorporating new insights create literary traditions that influence spiritual development throughout the region. Aluza, the goddess whose power flows like underground streams through every aspect of daily life, presides over fertility rituals that ensure agricultural abundance while blessing enterprises that generate urban prosperity. Shrines that mark sacred spaces throughout the territory provide gathering places for worship that maintains connection between settled populations and spiritual traditions rooted in nomadic heritage. Mystery cults that initiate participants into deeper understanding of divine will create hierarchies that complement secular structures. Artistic traditions that flourish under patronage create cultural achievements whose influence extends far beyond boundaries. Sculptural forms that decorate public monuments establish aesthetic standards that influence creative expression throughout the region. Painting techniques that adorn private residences demonstrate artistic sophistication that rivals anything produced in established cultural centers. Decorative arts that combine functional utility with visual beauty transform ordinary objects into works worthy of museum preservation. Musical traditions that develop in court circles create entertainment forms that spread throughout society while preserving cultural identity. Instruments whose design incorporates influences from across the known world produce sounds that appeal to global audiences while maintaining distinctly Arabian character. Compositions that celebrate achievements become popular throughout the territory while influencing musical development in neighboring regions. Performance practices that blend traditional melodies with sophisticated harmonic structures create hybrid forms that appeal to educated audiences. Literary achievements that preserve historical memory while entertaining contemporary audiences demonstrate the intellectual sophistication that characterizes Arabian civilization during its golden age. Epic poems that celebrate heroic deeds grow richer with each retelling, while maintaining essential narrative structures that encode cultural values. Prose works that record philosophical insights while providing practical guidance for daily life. Historical chronicles that preserve accurate records of important events while interpreting their significance for future generations. Training young people for adult roles in a society of growing complexity demands an education that addresses concerns and challenges unknown to the tribal systems of earlier generations. Language instruction that enables communication with peoples from across the known world while preserving indigenous linguistic heritage. Mathematical training that supports calculations and engineering projects while developing abstract reasoning abilities. Legal education that prepares officials to govern diverse populations according to principles that blend traditional wisdom with innovations required by changing circumstances. Armed organization that protects expanding territories while projecting authority across strategic regions requires professional forces whose capabilities exceed anything tribal levies could provide. Infantry regiments trained in formation, fighting, that can defend fixed positions against siege warfare while maintaining mobility necessary for wilderness operations. Cavalry squadrons whose speed enables rapid response to threats while providing reconnaissance capabilities that detect dangers before they develop into serious problems. Specialized units, whose expertise in particular forms of combat provides capabilities that standard forces cannot match. Weapons technology that equips these professional forces reflects innovations that incorporate lessons learned from encounters with enemies throughout the region. Metallurgical techniques that produce blades whose edges hold their sharpness through countless battles while remaining light enough for extended campaigns. Armor designs that provide protection against contemporary weapons while allowing freedom of movement essential for wilderness warfare. Siege equipment that can reduce fortifications while remaining mobile enough for rapid deployment across difficult terrain. Intelligence networks that support operations create information gathering capabilities that penetrate enemy councils while remaining invisible to counter-espionage efforts. Spy systems that provide early warning of potential threats while supplying detailed knowledge of enemy capabilities and intentions. Communication frameworks that coordinate activities across vast distances while maintaining security against interception. Diplomatic contacts that create sources of valuable information while establishing relationships that might prove useful during future crises. Global recognition that acknowledges Arabian sovereignty as legitimate and permanent manifests itself in various forms that confirm the transformation from tribal confederation to major regional power. Roman treaties that establish boundaries while creating frameworks for peaceful coexistence and cooperation. Persian agreements that treat wilderness representatives as equals in negotiations affecting regional stability. Egyptian compacts that guarantee mutual assistance while providing access to Nile Valley markets. As the reign of Aretas IV approaches, the stage stands prepared for achievements that will establish the mountain dominion among the great powers of antiquity. The foundations that generations of patient development have created will support accomplishments that astound contemporary observers while influencing events throughout the ancient world. Networks that span 3 continents carry Arabian influence to markets where wilderness goods compete successfully with products from more established sources. Diplomatic connections that reach from Britain to India create possibilities for cooperation that transcend traditional boundaries. The golden age that awaits will witness cultural flowering that rivals anything achieved by contemporary civilizations while maintaining distinctly Arabian character. Monuments that demonstrate engineering capabilities surpassing most contemporary achievements. Artistic traditions that influence creative expression throughout the region while preserving indigenous aesthetic values. Literary works that contribute to intellectual traditions spanning multiple cultures while maintaining unique perspectives rooted in wilderness experience. Capabilities that can defend national interests against any potential enemy while projecting power wherever circumstances require. Naval forces that control strategic waterways while enabling growth across dangerous seas. Intelligence operations that penetrate foreign courts while protecting state secrets from enemy espionage. Diplomatic corps whose negotiations shape regional politics while advancing national interests. The transformation stands complete, from scattered nomadic clans to dominion that commands respect throughout the ancient world. Soon, very soon, the reign that represents the absolute zenith of Arabian achievement will demonstrate to astonished observers what wilderness peoples can accomplish when unified vision, abundant resources, and favorable circumstances combine to create possibilities that earlier generations could never have imagined. Upon the wind-carved heights where eagles soar between granite pillars that pierce the sky like fingers of divine desire, the holy places of an ancient people breathe with energy that transforms stone into scripture. Here, where morning light first kisses the rose-red cliffs, and evening shadows creep like supplications across carved surfaces, the gods of the wilderness folk reveal themselves through mysteries older than memory, yet fresh as dawn, breaking over eternal peaks. Dushara, lord of the mountain throne, receives homage from believers whose devotion spans 3 continents, while their gifts fill treasuries that rival those of pharaohs. Within caverns where lamplight flickers against walls that shimmer like captured starlight, observances unfold that blend the primal wisdom of nomadic ancestors with sophisticated theological concepts learned through contact with distant civilizations. Incense smoke that carries the essence of frankincense and myrrh spirals upward toward invisible heavens, while clerics chant invocations in languages that echo with power drawn from sources beyond human understanding. These attendants, masters of knowledge that encompasses customs from across the known world, serve as intermediaries between mortal believers and immortal forces whose favor determines the fate of kingdoms. Dushara manifests his presence through beetles, consecrated stones whose simple forms contain essence that no human sculptor could capture or improve. These granite witnesses, shaped by forces older than civilization itself, stand upon altar platforms where generations of believers have poured libations of wine and oil that darken their surfaces with the accumulated devotion of centuries. Each beetles becomes a focal point where earthly supplications meet heavenly grace, where the concerns of merchants and farmers receive attention that can transform desperation into abundance. The Supreme Being's mountain throne, carved from living rock high above the valley, where mortals conduct their daily affairs, commands views that encompass territories stretching beyond visible horizons. From this elevated place of worship, where clerics perform rites that ensure royal legitimacy and national prosperity, Dushara oversees the destiny of peoples whose welfare depends upon his continued favor. The altar fires that burn continuously upon this height send smoke signals that proclaim devotion while requesting protection against enemies who might threaten the realm's security. Aluza, mistress of morning stars and flowing waters, presides over mysteries that celebrate the life-giving forces that transform barren landscapes into gardens of plenty. Her places of worship, nestled in oases where springs bubble from hidden sources and date palms provide shade from merciless suns, become gathering points for women whose supplications ensure fertility in fields and families alike. The observances that honor this feminine presence incorporate dance and song that awaken energies dormant in both soil and soul, creating celebrations that unite communities through shared joy. Consecrated groves where Aluza's presence dwells most powerfully provide refuges where believers can commune with natural forces that govern growth and renewal. Ancient trees whose roots tap underground streams that never fail become living houses of worship where petitions for abundant harvests mingle with requests for healthy children. The rites performed beneath these verdant canopies incorporate seasonal rhythms that connect human activities to cosmic cycles that regulate all earthly existence. Alat, protector of caravans and guardian of travelers who venture into dangers that lurk beyond settled territories, receives homage at crossroads where pathways converge like streams flowing toward distant seas. Her altars, marked by simple stone cairns that guide wayfarers through trackless wastes, become beacons of hope for merchants whose survival depends upon protection against bandits, sandstorms, and the countless perils that await those who dare to cross the wilderness. Gifts left at these roadside places, dates, water, small coins, create networks of mutual aid that transforms solitary journeys into community enterprises. The feminine power manifests protective force through amulets that travelers wear against their hearts. Small carvings that contain her essence while providing tangible connections to authority. These blessed objects, consecrated by clerics who understand the proper invocations and charged with power drawn from official places of worship, become lifelines for those who venture far from familiar territories. The merchants who carry these protective talismans into dangerous lands bear with them not merely personal faith, but the accumulated blessings of entire communities. Manat, mistress of fate, who determines when mortals must yield their breath to the eternal silence that awaits all flesh, presides over funeral rites that ease the transition between earthly existence and whatever lies beyond the veil of death. Her houses of worship, often situated on elevated ground where the dead can rest close to heaven, become repositories of wisdom concerning the mysteries that no living person can fully comprehend. The clerics who serve these somber places master knowledge that enables them to guide bereaved families through grief, while ensuring that departed souls receive proper honors. Burial customs that evolved under Manat's guidance demonstrate sophisticated understanding of death as transformation rather than mere ending. Tombs carved from living rock provide eternal homes that reflect the deceased's status while preserving their memory for future generations. The grave goods that accompany the departed, provision-filled pots, status-marking jewelry, and weapons ready for the next world, offer glimpses into how people expressed identity, status, and belief in the afterlife. Hallowed mountains that serve as natural houses of worship demonstrate how geography itself becomes scripture for peoples who recognize presence in landscape features that inspire awe and reverence. Jabal Qubtha, whose summit towers above the surrounding peaks like a throne prepared for celestial occupation, provides the setting for rites that require elevation to achieve proper focus. The pilgrimages that bring believers to these elevated places become journeys of transformation that test physical endurance while strengthening resolve. Jebel Madbar, the mountain of sacrifice where ancient altars receive gifts that seal covenants between mortals and immortals, preserves customs that stretch back to the earliest ancestors who first recognized presence in these granite heights. The observances performed upon this summit incorporate bloodless sacrifices that honor deities, while avoiding the violence that characterizes practices in some neighboring cultures. Grain donations, wine libations, and incense burned upon altar fires create aromatic petitions that rise toward heaven without requiring animal victims. High places carved from cliff faces provide amphitheaters where communities gather for festivals that unite diverse populations through shared celebration. These outdoor places of worship, accessible only through pathways that test the determination of believers, become stages where dramas unfold under skies that serve as vast cathedral domes. The acoustic properties of these natural theatres amplify hymns and chants while creating atmospheric effects that seem to manifest approval of human devotion. Rock-cut chambers that house mysteries provide intimate spaces where initiates can experience direct encounters with forces that require privacy and protection from casual observation. These underground places, carved with techniques that demonstrate engineering mastery, create environments where experiences can unfold without interference from mundane concerns. The decorative programs that adorn these hidden spaces incorporate symbols drawn from multiple religious sources, while maintaining coherent theological messages. An education built for leadership produces scholars whose learning goes beyond local traditions, reaching into theological thought from far-off lands. These learned men master multiple languages that enable communication with foreign pilgrims, while preserving texts in scripts that require specialized training to read accurately. Their libraries, housed in chambers protected from moisture and theft, preserve scrolls containing hymns, instructions, and philosophical treatises that enrich life, dynastic cults that celebrate royal authority as divinely sanctioned, create frameworks that legitimize political power, while satisfying needs of populations who require assurance that their leaders enjoy heavenly approval. The rites that mark coronations, royal marriages, military victories, and other state occasions incorporate theological elements that transform secular events into dramas. These observances, performed in settings that combine architectural grandeur with symbolism, create lasting memories that strengthen loyalty while inspiring reverence. Royal patronage that funds construction and supports activities demonstrates the intimate connection between temporal authority and leadership that characterizes successful governance in the ancient world. Monarchs who endow places of worship with sufficient resources to maintain proper observances ensure favor while creating institutions that outlast individual reigns. The monuments that result from this partnership between palace and house of worship become permanent testaments to the wisdom that recognizes welfare as essential to political stability. Artistic movements that flourish under patronage create aesthetic achievements that serve both devotional and cultural purposes. Sculptors who master techniques for carving stone into forms that capture essence while appealing to human sensibilities produce works that inspire worship while demonstrating cultural sophistication. The reliefs that decorate walls tell stories in visual languages that transcend literacy barriers while preserving theological concepts for future generations. Fresco painting that adorns interior chambers creates environments that transport believers into realms where earthly concerns yield to heavenly visions. These delicate artworks, executed with pigments that maintain their brilliance despite exposure to desert conditions, demonstrate technical mastery that rivals anything produced in contemporary cultural centers. The scenes they depict, figures receiving gifts, mythological narratives that encode moral lessons, decorative patterns that induce meditative states, create comprehensive programs that serve educational as well as aesthetic purposes. Jewelry production that creates ornaments for use demonstrates craftsmanship that transforms precious metals into objects worthy of appreciation. The techniques required for working gold into intricate forms that capture light, while maintaining structural integrity, develop through generations of accumulated expertise. These ornaments, worn by clerics during important observances, become visible manifestations of authority, while displaying the artistic excellence that characterizes the civilization. Bilingual inscriptions that record dedications, hymns, and theological statements in multiple scripts demonstrate the cosmopolitan character that territorial expansion creates. Greek text that enables communication with Hellenistic visitors appears alongside Aramaic passages that serve local congregations. These multilingual monuments become bridges between different cultural sources, while preserving indigenous concepts in forms that foreign scholars can study and appreciate. Daily life that unfolds within this framework reflects the integration of holy and secular concerns that characterizes any society where observance permeates every aspect of existence. Marketplace activities that begin with petitions for honest dealing and profitable exchange. Agricultural work that follows calendars that align human efforts with cosmic rhythms. Craft production that incorporates blessing observances that ensure quality while invoking protection against accidents and failures. Processions that mark important festivals transform ordinary streets into pathways where communities express devotion through collective participation. These parades, featuring elaborate costumes, musical performances, and displays of art, create spectacular demonstrations of faith that reinforce social bonds while celebrating shared beliefs. The routes followed by these processions connect various places of worship while creating temporary geography that encompasses entire urban areas. Seasonal festivals that celebrate agricultural cycles demonstrate how observances serve practical purposes that ensure community survival and prosperity. Harvest celebrations that give thanks for abundant crops while requesting continued favor for future growing seasons. Planting festivals that invoke blessings upon seeds while strengthening social bonds that enable cooperative agricultural efforts. These occasions, marked by feasting, entertainment, and exchanges, create rhythms that structure community life while preserving cultural heritage. Commercial rites that sanctify activities demonstrate how practices can serve economic purposes while maintaining ethical standards that protect honest merchants from unfair competition. Blessing observances that consecrate new business ventures while invoking protection against theft and fraud. Oath-taking procedures that invoke witnesses to agreements while creating supernatural sanctions against contract violations. These practices, performed in settings that inspire reverence, transform potentially contentious business relationships into covenants. Meals that mark important occasions create opportunities for communities to share food while acknowledging generosity that makes abundance possible. These feasts, prepared according to requirements and consumed in settings that inspire reverence, become sacramental experiences that unite participants through shared nourishment. The food served, bread baked from grain donations, wine poured as libations before consumption, fruits and vegetables blessed by clerics, carry significance that transforms ordinary sustenance into communion with forces. Prostitution that serves certain houses of worship provides income for institutions while offering believers intimate encounters with feminine energy. These carefully regulated practices, overseen by attendants who ensure proper procedures, create contexts where physical union becomes communion. The women who serve in these capacities, often drawn from respected families and trained in arts, become intermediaries between human desire and blessing. Pilgrimage networks that connect local places to distant locations create highways that enable believers to visit multiple sites while participating in larger communities. These journeys, often undertaken during specific seasons when travel conditions prove most favorable, become transformative experiences that test faith while strengthening devotion. The hospitality customs that support pilgrims create networks of mutual aid that transcend tribal boundaries while spreading influences. Oracle practices that enable direct communication with forces provide guidance for individuals and communities facing difficult decisions. These prophetic customs, centered at places where deities manifest their presence through various signs and portents, create consultation services that supplement wisdom with direct revelation. The procedures that govern oracular sessions, purification rites, gift requirements, interpretation protocols, ensure accuracy while preventing fraud. Healing customs that combine practices with medical knowledge demonstrate how institutions can serve practical needs while maintaining theological integrity. Infirmaries where sick pilgrims receive treatment that addresses both physical symptoms and causes of illness. Physician clerics who master both procedures and herbal remedies while understanding disease as manifestation of imbalance. These holistic approaches to healthcare create therapeutic environments that serve body and soul simultaneously. Mystery cults that initiate selected participants into deeper knowledge create hierarchical communities within larger frameworks. These exclusive organizations, often focused on particular deities or concepts, provide advanced instruction that goes beyond public observances. The initiation procedures that control admission to these groups lengthy preparations, sworn secrecy, symbolic deaths and rebirths create intense experiences that transform participants while creating bonds of mutual obligation. Syncretism that blends local heritage with foreign influences creates theological systems that serve diverse populations while maintaining cultural coherence. Egyptian elements that enter through contacts merge with indigenous concepts to create hybrid beliefs that satisfy varied needs. Greek philosophical concepts that arrive through diplomatic exchanges enrich local wisdom while providing intellectual frameworks that appeal to educated audiences. These synthetic developments demonstrate cultural flexibility that enables adaptation without abandoning essential identity. Women's roles in life provide opportunities for leadership that complement secular restrictions while offering paths to influence and authority. Priestesses who serve cults exercise authority that rivals male leaders while providing guidance specifically suited to female concerns. Female pilgrims who travel to distant places create networks that span political boundaries while spreading influences. Dancers whose performances invoke presence during important festivals become celebrated artists whose skills preserve cultural heritage. Timekeeping that regulates observances creates calendrical systems that coordinate community activities while maintaining harmony with cosmic rhythms. Lunar calculations that determine festival dates while tracking seasonal changes. Solar observations that mark agricultural deadlines while providing navigational references for travelers. These temporal frameworks, maintained by clerics who master astronomical knowledge, create structured environments that enable complex social coordination. Mortuary practices that ensure proper treatment of the deceased demonstrate sophisticated understanding of death as transition that requires careful management to avoid contamination while honoring departed souls. Mummification techniques that preserve bodies for eternal existence while preventing decay that might offend sensibilities. Tomb construction that provides adequate housing for souls while protecting remains from disturbance. These elaborate procedures, requiring significant resources and expert knowledge, create institutions that serve both purposes. As holy and secular blend in daily existence where every action carries significance and presence manifests through natural phenomena, the civilization reaches cultural heights that rivals anything achieved by contemporary peoples. The synthesis of wilderness wisdom and cosmopolitan sophistication creates unique expressions of human creativity that influence development throughout the region while preserving distinctive identity rooted in desert experience. The foundations that support this achievement prove more durable than political structures, their influence continuing long after territorial boundaries shift and royal dynasties yield to foreign conquest. The places that accumulate significance during these golden centuries continue to inspire reverence among pilgrims who seek connection to sources of strength that transcend temporal authority. The wisdom that emerges from theological synthesis continues to enrich life while providing guidance for communities that must navigate changing circumstances without abandoning essential values. In the marble chambers of far-off Rome, where power is measured in empires and ambition, quiet voices now speak the name of a land once lost to the wild, Nabataea. The desert realm that rose from scattered nomadic clans now commands attention in the highest circles of power. Its envoys received with honors reserved for allies whose friendship brings tangible benefits. Yet beneath this surface, courtesy flows an undercurrent of calculation, as administrators recognize both opportunity and threat in a domain whose autonomy challenges the empire's claim to universal dominion. Within the rose-red halls, where Aretas IV holds court among treasures gathered from 3 continents, the weight of scrutiny presses like gathering storm clouds upon horizons that once knew only limitless freedom. The monarch who inherited a realm at its zenith must now navigate currents of international relations where a single miscalculation could transform autonomy into subjugation. His counselors, men whose wisdom encompasses the subtle arts of negotiation, as thoroughly as they understand the harsh realities of desert warfare, debate policies that balance defiance against submission while seeking paths that preserve sovereignty without provoking invasion. The marriage alliance that brings Herod Antipas's rejected wife to the Nabataean court transforms private scandal into public crisis, demonstrating how personal relationships between rulers can ignite conflicts that reshape regional circumstances. When the Judean tetrarch abandons his bride to marry Herodias, his brother's wife, the insult reverberates through both realms, like earthquake tremors that precede volcanic eruptions. The daughter of Aretas, humiliated before international observers who measure royal dignity by the respect accorded to marriage bonds, becomes a symbol of wounded honor that demands satisfaction. Preparations for conflict that follow this catastrophe reveal the sophisticated capabilities that generations of careful development have created. The armies that marshal in mountain strongholds combine traditional desert mobility with disciplined formations that can stand against any enemy force in the region. Cavalry squadrons, whose horses have been bred for endurance rather than speed, develop tactics perfectly adapted to terrain where water sources determine victory more surely than weapons technology. Infantry regiments equipped with the finest arms that smiths can forge train in techniques that exploit every advantage their homeland provides. What begins as a personal grievance erupts into a war between Nabataea and Judea, revealing how swiftly local tensions can tip into wider conflict. Herod Antipas, whose authority depends upon backing from Rome, discovers that support cannot compensate for tactical incompetence when facing enemies who understand their environment as intimately as lovers understand each other's hearts. His legions, trained for garrison duty rather than campaign warfare, prove inadequate against opponents whose ancestors learned fighting as a condition of survival. Desert campaigns that unfold across landscapes where every cliff face conceals potential ambush sites and every valley offers escape routes known only to local guides expose the limitations of conventional thinking when applied to unconventional terrain. The Judean forces, despite their superior numbers and standardized equipment, find themselves outmaneuvered by enemies who treat impossible terrain as natural highways. Supply lines that stretch across hostile territory become vulnerable to raids that strike without warning, before vanishing into landscapes that swallow pursuing forces like quicksand. Victory that crowns Nabataean arms establishes Aretas IV's reputation as a commander worthy of comparison with the greatest leaders of his age, while demonstrating that client states cannot automatically depend upon protection when their own incompetence creates strategic disasters. The defeat that humbles Herod Antipas reverberates through regional circumstances, encouraging other subject peoples to question whether dominance truly represents an inevitable force of nature, or merely another form of arrangement that clever opposition might challenge successfully. Reaction from Rome to this unexpected development reveals the empire's growing concern about Nabataean autonomy and its potential implications for prestige throughout the eastern territories. When client rulers can be defeated by forces that officially acknowledge no authority, the entire system of indirect rule that enables efficient administration of vast territories comes under scrutiny. Tiberius, that calculating emperor whose policies emphasize stability over expansion, must decide whether success requires direct intervention or whether solutions might preserve dignity while avoiding costly commitments. The investigation that brings Vitellius to examine the circumstances surrounding Herod's defeat demonstrates determination to understand both the immediate causes and broader implications of this setback. This experienced administrator, whose previous assignments have required delicate handling of Eastern complexities, approaches the question with caution, born from recognition that hasty action could transform local difficulty into regional catastrophe. His reports reveal grudging admiration for capabilities, while warning against underestimating opponents, whose strength derives from advantages that conventional thinking cannot easily counter. Negotiations that follow victory create opportunities for statesmanship that wise leaders exploit to secure long-term benefits rather than merely savoring short-term triumphs. Aratus IV, recognizing that complete humiliation of allies could provoke intervention regardless of cost considerations, moderates his demands to levels that preserve honor while enabling face-saving compromises for defeated enemies. This calculated restraint demonstrates maturity that transforms potential disaster into foundation for future cooperation. This carefully crafted settlement sets in motion a framework that will echo through future political dealings. Recognition of Nabataean grievances that justifies action, while acceptance of territorial adjustments that compensate for damages suffered. Exchange of hostages that provides guarantees for future peaceful behavior, while creating personal bonds between royal families that might prevent similar conflicts. Most importantly, acknowledgement of autonomy that satisfies sovereignty concerns while maintaining frameworks for cooperation that serve mutual interests. Rabble II, ascending to authority during these delicate years, when attention focuses increasingly upon affairs, inherits both opportunities and challenges that will define his reign and determine his realm's ultimate fate. This final independent monarch must demonstrate capabilities that justify continued autonomy, while avoiding provocations that might trigger interventions his predecessors successfully deterred. His court becomes a stage where every decision carries implications for national survival, where finesse proves as crucial as preparedness in preserving freedoms that countless generations struggled to achieve. Strategies that emerge during this period of heightened international scrutiny demonstrate determination to maintain autonomy through prosperity rather than merely resistance. Policies that diversify revenue sources beyond traditional caravan trade, while developing new markets that reduce dependence upon goodwill from Rome. Agricultural innovations that increase food production, while supporting larger populations without creating unsustainable environmental pressures. Industrial development that establishes manufacturing capabilities sufficient to supply essential needs, without relying upon imports that could be interrupted during crises. Copper mining operations that expand throughout the mountain territories provide raw materials for domestic metalworking, while generating exports that command favorable prices in international markets. The techniques required for extracting ore from increasingly deep excavations develop through accumulated experience while incorporating innovations learned from foreign engineers. Smelting facilities that transform raw materials into finished products demonstrate technological capabilities that enable self-sufficiency while creating employment for populations that might otherwise depend upon agriculture alone. Textile production that builds upon traditional weaving skills creates industries capable of supplying both domestic needs and export markets with fabrics whose quality rivals products from established manufacturing centers. The cultivation of plants that provide dyes and fibers, while developing techniques for processing raw materials into finished goods that meet international standards. Marketing networks that carry textiles to distant customers, while establishing reputations for reliability that ensure continued demand despite uncertainties. A shift in farming that moves beyond old staples, boosting yields through better methods and broader fields. The development of new varieties that thrive in local conditions, while providing better nutrition and higher yields than previous strains. Irrigation systems that enable farming in previously unusable areas, while conserving water resources through efficiency improvements that maximize benefit from limited rainfall. Initiatives that maintain autonomy through careful management of relationships with multiple major powers demonstrate sophisticated understanding of international relations during an era when regional balances shift constantly. Embassies to Persian courts that create alternative sources of support, while providing counterweights to pressure from Rome. Egyptian connections that ensure access to Nile Valley markets, while offering potential allies against expansion. Indian Ocean contacts that open new possibilities, while reducing reliance upon Mediterranean networks. Cultural developments that flourish despite pressures demonstrate the resilience of societies that possess strong foundations and confident leadership. Architectural projects that continue the tradition of monumental construction while adapting to changing circumstances and available resources. Artistic achievements that maintain aesthetic standards while incorporating influences absorbed through international contacts. Literary productions that preserve historical memory while interpreting contemporary events for future generations. The tomb of Sextius Florentinus, carved for a governor who chose to rest eternally among the rose-red cliffs rather than return to soil, symbolizes the complex relationships that develop between Nabataean society and foreign officials who serve in the region. This monument, executed with techniques that demonstrate local craftsmanship while honoring foreign dignitary, becomes testimony to cultural synthesis that transcends boundaries. The inscriptions that record the deceased's achievements speak to audiences in multiple languages while proclaiming respect that crossing cultural lines creates. Adapting rituals without losing the heart of belief shows how spiritual life can endure even in the face of pressure. Synagogue construction that accommodates Jewish populations while respecting local customs and regulations. Christian communities that establish themselves among diverse populations while contributing to social harmony through charitable activities and inclusive practices. Traditional beliefs that evolve to address new circumstances while preserving connections to ancestral wisdom. Preparing young people for the demands of a rapidly changing world means meeting needs that older generations never saw coming. Language instruction that enables communication with officials while preserving indigenous linguistic heritage. Legal training that encompasses both traditional customary law and regulations that govern activities. Technical education that provides skills needed for development while maintaining cultural values that define community identity. Scientific achievements that emerge from increased contact with international scholarly communities demonstrate how intellectual exchange enriches local knowledge while contributing to global understanding. Astronomical observations that improve navigation techniques while providing calendrical information needed for agricultural and religious planning. Medical advances that combine traditional healing practices with innovations learned from foreign physicians while developing new treatments for diseases that affect local populations. Engineering solutions that address infrastructure needs while incorporating technical improvements that increase efficiency and durability. Women's roles during this transitional period reflect both opportunities created by cultural exchange and restrictions imposed by necessities. Female merchants who operate businesses that contribute to self-sufficiency while navigating legal frameworks that may limit their activities. Royal women whose marriages create connections while influencing decisions through informal channels. Religious leaders who serve communities while adapting practices to accommodate changing circumstances. Marriage arrangements that connect the royal family to neighboring dynasties create networks of kinship that could provide protection during crises, while potentially compromising autonomy through competing loyalties. Unions that strengthen alliances with friendly powers, while creating obligations that might conflict with national interests. Marriages that serve immediate needs, while establishing precedents that could influence future policy decisions. Urban development that accommodates growing populations while maintaining security against potential threats demonstrates adaptive planning that addresses multiple challenges simultaneously. Neighborhood organization that integrates diverse ethnic groups while preserving social cohesion necessary for effective governance. Infrastructure improvements that provide essential services while creating employment opportunities that support stability. Defensive preparations that strengthen security without appearing provocative to observers who monitor capabilities. Innovations that maintain competitive advantages despite increasing oversight create new possibilities for prosperity while reducing vulnerabilities that enemies might exploit. Banking services that facilitate international transactions while providing domestic credit that supports expansion. Insurance arrangements that protect merchants against losses while enabling ventures that might otherwise prove too risky. Quality control systems that maintain reputations for excellence while meeting standards required for access to regulated markets. While outside legal influences grow stronger, many communities continue to uphold their own justice customs that reflect local priorities. Court procedures that can handle disputes involving foreign parties while maintaining cultural authenticity that preserves community identity. Property rights that protect individual ownership while accommodating requirements that may affect land use and taxation. Criminal justice that maintains order while respecting both local customs and expectations. Intelligence activities that provide information needed for effective policymaking while protecting state secrets from foreign espionage efforts. Networks that monitor activities while providing early warning of potential threats to autonomy. Sources that reveal intentions while creating opportunities for preemptive action that might prevent crises. Contacts that gather intelligence while maintaining business relationships that benefit both parties. As the first century of the Common Era draws toward its close, the realm that once commanded respect through demonstrated strength now faces challenges that prowess alone cannot overcome. The skills that enabled successful navigation of regional circumstances must now address pressures from an empire whose resources dwarf anything previous generations encountered. The foundations that supported autonomy through prosperity require constant innovation to maintain competitiveness in markets increasingly dominated by preferences. Cultural achievements that represent the pinnacle of civilization continue to inspire admiration while demonstrating capabilities that justify continued autonomy. Yet even these accomplishments cannot disguise the fundamental shift in regional relationships that makes traditional sovereignty increasingly difficult to maintain. The paths that preserved freedom for past generations may no longer prove adequate against challenges that require new approaches to ancient problems. The final decades of independent rule approach, with the weight of inevitability that accompanies historical transformations, too powerful for individual resistance to overcome. The realm that rose from desert foundations to claim equality with the greatest powers of antiquity prepares to face tests that will determine whether autonomy represents a permanent achievement or merely a temporary arrangement that changing circumstances render obsolete. Yet even as storm clouds gather upon horizons, the civilization that flourished in mountain strongholds continues to demonstrate vitality that transcends governmental structures. The cultural foundations that supported centuries of achievement may prove more durable than arrangements, their influence surviving whatever transformations await in the uncertain future that approaches with the measured pace of legions marching toward inevitable confrontation. Light touches the red cliffs as it has for generations, but this particular morning, March 22nd, AD 106, marks a moment when beauty meets irreversible change. Within the carved chambers where generations of monarchs have received tribute from distant lands and dispensed justice according to ancient customs, silence now reigns where once the voices of counselors debated policies that shaped the destiny of nations. Rabel II, the final sovereign of an independent Nabataean realm, has yielded his breath to eternity without naming an heir, leaving behind a vacuum that ambitious neighbors regard with the calculating eyes of predators sensing opportunity. In distant Rome, where marble corridors echo with the footsteps of senators, whose decisions affect the fate of continents, Emperor Trajan receives reports that describe both challenge and opportunity in the eastern territories. This warrior emperor, whose genius has already expanded boundaries beyond anything achieved by his predecessors, recognizes in the succession crisis an invitation to complete conquests that previous generations had contemplated but never dared attempt. The territory that will bear the name Arabia awaits creation through the application of legionary discipline to peoples whose fierce independence has long challenged ambitious plans. Cornelius Palmer, that seasoned general whose campaigns in Dacia have demonstrated both tactical brilliance and governmental wisdom, receives orders that will transform him from mere commander into architect of peaceful transition. The strategy that guides his mission reflects lessons learned from previous annexations, where hasty action created rebellions that required decades to suppress. Rather than attempting conquest through force alone, this expedition will demonstrate how skillful negotiation can achieve what brutal suppression might accomplish only at enormous cost in blood and treasure. The legions that march eastward through Syrian territories carry with them not merely weapons of war, but the tools of civilization that transform conquered lands into productive regions. Engineers whose expertise enables construction of roads that will connect strongholds to the communication network. Surveyors whose measurements will establish boundaries and property rights according to frameworks that ensure stability and prosperity. Specialists whose knowledge encompasses taxation systems, judicial procedures, and governmental structures that enable efficient rule over diverse populations. Yet the transformation that unfolds when these forces reach the mountain strongholds proves remarkably different from the violent conquests that characterized earlier expansion into Celtic Gaul or Germanic territories. The civic leaders who emerge to greet Palmer's columns do so not as defiant enemies, preparing desperate resistance, but as pragmatic officials who recognize inevitability while seeking to preserve what benefits their communities might derive from changed circumstances. This peaceful transition, orchestrated through negotiations that satisfy honor while acknowledging reality, becomes a model for expansion that minimizes destruction while maximizing cooperation. The ceremonies that mark the formal incorporation of Nabataean territories into the system demonstrate both respect for local customs and assertion of new authority. In amphitheaters carved from living rock, where generations of monarchs received homage from subject peoples, Palmer accepts oaths of loyalty from tribal leaders whose submission represents not defeat, but adaptation to circumstances beyond their control. The rituals that accompany these proceedings blend respect for indigenous practices with assertions of prerogative, creating hybrid observances that ease psychological adjustment to transformed circumstances. Reorganization that follows annexation reveals the sophisticated governmental machinery that enables rule over territories whose diversity would challenge any bureaucratic system. The capital that emerges in the northern stronghold of Bosra demonstrates strategic thinking that recognizes both geographical advantages and symbolic necessities. This location, commanding approaches from Damascus while providing access to traditional trade routes, becomes the nerve center from which authority radiates throughout the annexed territories. Petra, that jewel among cities whose rose-red monuments have witnessed the rise and zenith of desert civilization, continues to flourish under the new dispensation while adapting its functions to serve territorial rather than royal purposes. The civic buildings that rise among ancient palaces demonstrate synthesis that blends classical proportions with indigenous building techniques. Forums that provide gathering places for public business replace throne rooms where monarchs once held court. Basilicas that house judicial proceedings adapt spaces once dedicated to royal ceremonies for the requirements of governance. The Via Nova Traiana, that magnificent highway, whose construction represents one of the greatest engineering achievements in Eastern territories, begins to snake its way through mountain passes that once knew only caravan paths, worn smooth by countless generations of merchant traffic. This roadway, stretching from Syrian Bosra to the Red Sea port, that will serve as gateway to Indian Ocean commerce, demonstrates the vision that transforms scattered settlements into integrated networks serving continental purposes. The bridges that span desert wadis and the mile markers that provide precise measurements create infrastructure that will survive the arrangements that commissioned its construction. Construction projects that accompany roadway development reveal the massive resources that can be mobilized when determined to transform regional circumstances. Quarries that provide stone for bridges and fortifications employ techniques that surpass anything achieved during the era of royal building programs. Engineering works that channel water across impossible distances while maintaining gradients that ensure adequate flow demonstrate technological capabilities that dwarf even the sophisticated hydraulic systems created by previous generations. The workshops that supply tools and materials become centers of industrial activity that provide employment while introducing new manufacturing techniques. Adaptations that enable governance to function effectively among populations whose customs differ significantly from Mediterranean norms demonstrate the flexibility that characterizes successful rule of diverse territories. Systems that incorporate traditional customary law within judicial frameworks while ensuring consistency with constitutional principles that govern all territorial oversight. Educational programs that preserve indigenous languages and practices while introducing Latin literacy and classical learning that enable participation in empire-wide intellectual exchanges. Transformations that redirect trade flows through networks create both opportunities and challenges for merchant families whose prosperity has traditionally depended upon independence from external oversight. The taxation systems that generate revenue for territorial governance while providing predictable frameworks for business planning. Customs regulations that ensure control over strategic goods while enabling legitimate commerce to flourish under official protection. Currency policies that maintain monetary stability while integrating local financial systems into empire-wide banking networks. Developments that accompany change demonstrate both continuity and adaptation in spiritual life. As communities adjust to altered circumstances, traditional Nabataean deities continue to receive worship in ancient sanctuaries, while new cults that appeal to territorial populations establish themselves in urban centers. Christian communities that benefit from improved connections to Mediterranean centers of the faith, while contributing to social harmony through charitable activities that serve all segments of society. Jewish congregations that maintain their ancient practices while participating in opportunities that territorial status creates. Evolution that characterizes building programs during the early period reflects the synthesis that emerges when indigenous customs encounter classical influences backed by unlimited resources. Temples that honor traditional deities while incorporating elements that appeal to audiences. Public baths that introduce social customs while adapting to local climate conditions and preferences. Theaters that provide entertainment venues while serving as gathering places where diverse populations can participate in shared experiences. Movements that flourish under patronage demonstrate how creative expression adapts to serve new purposes while preserving essential elements that define identity. Sculptural programs that decorate public buildings blend classical subjects with indigenous motifs, while maintaining aesthetic standards that appeal to educated audiences throughout the territories. Mosaic work that adorns private residences incorporates techniques learned from Mediterranean craftsmen, while depicting scenes that resonate with local values. Decorative arts that serve both functional and aesthetic purposes create hybrid forms that reflect the multicultural character of society. Institutions that prepare young people for careers in territorial service while preserving heritage demonstrate the balance between adaptation and continuity that characterizes successful transition. Schools that teach Latin and Greek while maintaining instruction in traditional languages and customs. Training that prepares officials to serve in territorial government while understanding local conditions and requirements. Technical education that provides skills needed for construction and engineering projects while preserving traditional crafts that serve local needs. Development that occurs under territorial oversight creates prosperity that surpasses anything achieved during the royal period, while transforming the basis of regional wealth. Agricultural improvements that increase productivity through introduction of new crops and farming techniques, while expanding cultivation into previously unused areas. Industrial development that establishes manufacturing centers, producing goods for empire-wide markets, while providing employment for growing urban populations. Expansion that creates business opportunities for entrepreneurs, while integrating regional economies into continental networks. The copper mining industry that expands dramatically under territorial oversight demonstrates how resources can be developed to serve both local and broader needs. New extraction techniques that enable profitable working of previously marginal deposits while improving safety conditions for workers. Smelting operations that produce refined metals, meeting quality standards while creating value-added products that command premium prices in international markets. Transportation networks that carry raw materials and finished goods to distant customers while reducing costs through improved efficiency. Drawing on age-old weaving traditions, textile production grows into an industry that meets local demands and earns acclaim across Eastern markets. The introduction of new fibers and dyes that expand the range of products while maintaining the distinctive characteristics that make regional textiles recognizable in distant markets. Manufacturing techniques that improve productivity while preserving the craftsmanship that ensures continued demand for luxury goods among wealthy customers. Improved farming methods that raise yields and support larger communities make it possible for towns to grow and for people to take on roles beyond survival. Irrigation projects that bring water to previously arid lands while improving distribution systems that serve existing farms. Crop rotation techniques that maintain soil fertility while increasing yields through scientific farming methods. Livestock breeding programs that improve the quality of animals while expanding herds that provide protein and raw materials for various industries. Urban planning that accommodates growing populations while maintaining the distinctive character that makes cities attractive to visitors and residents alike, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of civic development. Neighborhood organization that integrates diverse ethnic groups while preserving social harmony necessary for effective governance. Infrastructure improvements that provide essential services while creating the amenities that make urban life comfortable and productive. Zoning regulations that balance business, residential, and public uses, while preserving the aesthetic qualities that define civic identity. Developments that address situations created by territorial oversight, while respecting traditional customs, demonstrate the flexibility that enables successful governance of diverse populations. Court procedures that can handle complex disputes while maintaining the informal mediation processes that serve neighborhood conflicts. Property laws that protect individual rights, while accommodating territorial requirements for taxation and public works. Criminal justice systems that maintain order, while respecting differences that affect community standards and expectations. Organization that provides security for the territory, while integrating local forces into defensive systems, demonstrates how regional capabilities can be preserved while serving broader strategic purposes. Auxiliary units that utilize traditional fighting skills while adopting equipment and tactics that enable coordination with legionary forces. Fortification programs that protect strategic locations while providing bases for rapid response to threats that might emerge anywhere within the territorial boundaries. Intelligence networks that monitor potential security problems while maintaining connections that prevent minor disputes from escalating into serious conflicts. Social transformations that occur as traditional tribal and royal hierarchies yield to territorial class structures, create both opportunities and challenges for families whose status derived from previous arrangements. Aristocratic families who adapt to social conventions while maintaining influence through wealth and leadership. Merchant classes who benefit from expanded opportunities while navigating new regulatory frameworks that govern business activities. Professional groups who serve territorial needs while preserving traditional skills that remain essential for local community functions. During this time of change, women's roles show the tension between new openings and the old rules that still held sway. Female property owners who benefit from inheritance laws while adapting to social expectations that may differ from traditional practices. Businesswomen who operate within networks that span the territory while maintaining connections to local communities and customs. Spiritual leaders who serve community needs while adapting to theological developments that reflect territorial influences. The way marriage joins households and builds community reflects the broader mix of practices shaping society at the time. Wedding ceremonies that blend indigenous rituals with classical conventions while satisfying requirements that ensure recognition throughout the territory. Dowry arrangements that transfer wealth while establishing family alliances that serve both social and purposes. International marriages that create connections between families and partners from other regions while strengthening unity. Exchanges that result from improved transportation and communication networks enrich intellectual life while contributing to empire-wide scholarly movements. Libraries that preserve traditional texts while acquiring works from throughout the classical world that expand local knowledge and horizons. Scholarly correspondence that connects intellectuals with colleagues in major centers while contributing original insights to ongoing intellectual debates. Collaborations that bring together craftsmen from different backgrounds while creating new forms that influence development throughout the Eastern territories. As the 2nd century progresses and territorial oversight becomes fully established, the former realm settles into patterns of life that provide prosperity and security while preserving essential elements of identity. The transformation from independent monarchy to territorial status represents not the destruction of civilization, but its evolution into forms adapted to new circumstances and expanded opportunities. The rose-red cliffs continue to shelter communities whose daily lives blend custom with innovation, while their carved monuments preserve the memory of ancient glories for future generations to study and admire. Yet even as prosperity increases and territorial status brings benefits that royal independence could never have provided, subtle changes begin to manifest that suggest future challenges to the stability that oversight has created. The trade routes that once focused exclusively on the mountain strongholds begin to shift toward alternative pathways that bypass traditional centers while serving the same ultimate destinations. Palmyra, that oasis city whose merchants have learned to exploit their strategic position, emerges as a competitor whose advantages may eventually challenge the supremacy that geography once guaranteed to the carved city. With roots that hold fast, these foundations keep prosperity alive through the slow drift of change. The skills developed through centuries of independent governance continue to serve territorial purposes, while preserving community institutions that maintain social cohesion. The heritage that flourished under royal patronage adapts to serve new purposes, while maintaining the distinctive characteristics that define regional identity and ensure its preservation through whatever changes the future may bring. As the 3rd century fades into twilight, shadows stretch through stone doorways, once alive with the chatter of traders bearing riches from across 3 continents. The rose-red cliffs stand as magnificent as ever, their granite faces catching the last light of day, with the same ethereal glow that amazed visitors in ages past. Yet the bustling energy that once filled these mountain amphitheaters retreats like a tide toward the horizon of memory, where thousands once lived in prosperity built upon the crossroads of the world. Hundreds now struggle to maintain customs and institutions that seem increasingly disconnected from harsh realities. Once essential to the flow of commerce, these highland corridors now stand quiet, as shifting forces redirect trade like rivers, abandoning a dried-up course. Palmyra, that oasis jewel whose merchants have mastered the art of survival, while expanding their networks across impossible distances, emerges as the preferred way station for expeditions that once considered the mountain capital their essential destination. The Syrian routes that bypass traditional pathways offer advantages that highland strongholds cannot match. Easier terrain, shorter distances, protection from tribal raids that have grown bolder as central authority weakens. Maritime alternatives that utilize Red Sea shipping to bypass overland routes entirely transform the fundamental equations that govern international commerce. Ships that can carry larger cargoes at lower costs while avoiding the taxes, delays, and dangers of terrestrial travel attract merchants whose primary loyalty belongs to profit rather than sentiment. The Indian Ocean monsoons that once seemed like distant concerns now determine the prosperity of communities whose ancestors never glimpsed salt water, as naval routes reshape patterns of exchange that had persisted for centuries. The incense business that formed the foundation of Nabataean prosperity faces challenges that go beyond mere competition. Christian communities throughout the empire increasingly reject the elaborate sanctuary rituals that consumed vast quantities of frankincense and myrrh, viewing such ceremonies as pagan extravagances incompatible with simplified spiritual practices. The demand that once seemed insatiable begins to contract as new forms of worship emphasize prayer and contemplation over aromatic sacrifices that filled holy places with precious smoke. Persian conflicts that consume Roman attention and resources create instabilities that reverberate throughout eastern territories, like earthquake tremors that precede major collapses. Military campaigns that drain treasuries while disrupting commercial networks. Taxation policies that extract ever larger portions of regional wealth to fund distant wars whose outcomes matter little to local populations. Currency debasements that undermine confidence in monetary systems while making long-distance exchange increasingly difficult and risky. Regional instability that accompanies these broader troubles manifests itself in various forms that threaten the security and prosperity that territorial status once guaranteed. Tribal raids that probe weakened frontier defenses while seeking opportunities for plunder. Bandit groups that exploit reduced patrols to attack expeditions and settlements. Local conflicts that escalate when central authority proves unable or unwilling to mediate disputes that previous generations would have resolved quickly and decisively. Within the mountain capital itself, signs of deterioration become increasingly apparent to observers who remember the prosperity of earlier generations. Public buildings that fall into disrepair as municipal revenues prove insufficient for maintenance of infrastructure that required constant attention. Private residences that stand empty as families migrate to regions that offer better opportunities for advancement and prosperity. Workshops that close their doors as demand for luxury goods diminishes and raw materials become scarce or expensive. Population movements that characterize this period of uncertainty create social disruptions that compound economic difficulties. Skilled artisans who seek employment in cities where their talents command better compensation. Merchant families who relocate their operations to centers that provide more reliable access to customers and suppliers. Young people who abandon traditional occupations to pursue careers in distant territories, where service offers stability and advancement opportunities. Yet even as urban centers contract, the surrounding territories experience different forms of transformation that demonstrate the adaptability of populations determined to survive changing circumstances. Agricultural communities that expand production to compensate for reduced income. Pastoral groups that exploit abandoned farmlands while developing new relationships with settled populations. Craft specialists who adapt their skills to serve local markets while maintaining techniques that safeguard ancient traditions. Nomadic peoples who had once acknowledged Nabataean authority begin to reassert independence that territorial integration had temporarily suppressed. Bedouin groups whose traditional seasonal migrations had been regulated by settled governments resume old patterns of movement while challenging boundaries that no longer serve clear purposes. Tribal alliances that had been fractured by imperial policies begin to reconstitute themselves according to kinship bonds and mutual interests that transcend artificial divisions. Spiritual developments during this period reflect both continuity and change, as faith communities adapt to altered circumstances while maintaining essential beliefs and practices. Christian congregations that grow stronger as support for the new religion increases, while traditional shrines lose both patronage and worshippers. Monastic establishments that provide stability and continuity during times of social upheaval, while preserving knowledge and charitable services that assist struggling populations. The Great Earthquake of 363 AD strikes the mountain strongholds with devastating force that transforms marvels into fragments scattered across valley floors like broken dreams. Sanctuary facades that had withstood centuries of winds crumble in moments as seismic forces release energies that dwarf any human construction. underground chambers that had provided cool refuge from heat fill with rubble that blocks access to treasures and texts that will remain hidden until the earth yields them again to daylight. Reconstruction efforts that follow this natural catastrophe reveal both the determination of surviving populations to maintain their identity and the limitations imposed by reduced resources and diminished numbers. Civic leaders who attempt to restore essential buildings while accepting that many structures will remain as remnants that testify to vanished glories. Faith communities that rebuild places of worship on smaller scales while maintaining the essential functions that serve spiritual needs. The decline in written accounts reflects the movement of the educated class toward areas with greater promise, leaving former centers of literacy quiet as opportunities shift elsewhere. The last Nabataean writings, etched by individuals whose names echo with the sounds of a fading language, appear on surfaces that few contemporaries can read and even fewer understand. These final testimonies, preserved in granite that will outlast the political arrangements that commissioned them, become mute witnesses that speak to empty air about a society gradually fading into historical oblivion. Byzantine control that gradually extends over these territories brings new forms of governance that serve different purposes while attempting to maintain essential services. Officials appointed from distant capitals who understand bureaucratic procedures but lack intimate knowledge of local conditions and customs. Legal systems that impose uniform standards while struggling to address situations that arise from diversity, and traditional practices that persist despite official disapproval. Christian bishops who establish episcopal authority in the former strongholds work to transform pagan sacred sites into centers of the new faith, while respecting the building legacy that makes these locations powerful symbols of divine presence. Churches that rise within sanctuary precincts while incorporating decorative elements that speak to local aesthetic preferences. Monasteries that preserve classical learning while adapting wisdom to serve contemporary spiritual needs. Military reorganization that accompanies Byzantine administration reflects changing strategic priorities that emphasize frontier defense against Persian and Arab threats, rather than maintenance of internal security and protection of commercial networks. Garrison forces that focus on external enemies while providing limited assistance for local law enforcement. Fortification programs that strengthen key defensive positions while abandoning outlying settlements that cannot be adequately protected with available resources. Arab expansion that begins in the 7th century brings new challenges and opportunities to populations that have survived previous transitions through adaptability and resilience. Muslim armies that offer religious tolerance and commercial opportunities to communities willing to accept new political arrangements. Administrative systems that incorporate local leaders while introducing practices that reflect different values and governmental philosophies. The Islamic conquest of 636 AD occurs with remarkably little violence or disruption, as local populations recognize both the inevitability of change and the potential benefits that new rulers might provide. Surrender negotiations that preserve traditional rights while acknowledging new sovereignty. Tax policies that often prove less burdensome than previous systems while providing revenues needed for governmental operations. Regulations that encourage exchange while protecting established businesses from unfair competition. Synthesis that emerges during the early Islamic period demonstrates how societies adapt to new circumstances while maintaining essential elements of their identity. Building traditions that influence mosque design while incorporating decorative motifs that speak to local aesthetic preferences. Scholarly activities that preserve classical texts while contributing to intellectual developments that enrich the broader Islamic world. Creative expressions that blend indigenous techniques with styles that reflect the multicultural character of the expanding caliphate. Crusader expeditions that briefly establish European control over portions of these territories during the medieval period reveal how the mountain capital appears to foreign observers whose backgrounds differ dramatically from those of previous inhabitants. Knights and pilgrims who marvel at constructions they cannot understand while attributing them to biblical figures or legendary kings. Defensive preparations that adapt fortifications to serve medieval military requirements while causing damage that obscures original intentions. Ottoman administration that eventually establishes stable governance over these territories demonstrates how imperial systems can preserve building legacies while serving contemporary administrative needs. Survey projects that catalogue remains while assessing their potential value for purposes both practical and scholarly. Protection measures that prevent vandalism while enabling limited study of structures whose origins have become matters of speculation and wonder. Bedouin oral traditions that preserve recollections of past glories while adapting these stories to serve contemporary needs demonstrate how historical consciousness survives transformations that might otherwise erase collective remembrance. Epic poems that celebrate heroic deeds while encoding geographical information that guides travelers through landscapes where roads have vanished. Genealogical accounts that connect families to legendary ancestors while maintaining social hierarchies that persist despite changed circumstances. Travelers who venture into these remote territories during later centuries encounter remnants that inspire wonder and speculation. Scholars who attempt to identify the builders while relying on fragmentary sources that provide more questions than answers. Artists who sketch the facades while creating romantic interpretations that capture imagination more than historical accuracy. Merchants who shelter in the chambers while marveling at engineering they cannot comprehend. The quiet that settles over these mountain strongholds grows deeper with each passing generation, as the last speakers of the native tongue yield their breath to eternity without finding pupils to receive their wisdom. The script that once recorded commercial contracts and royal decrees becomes as mysterious as the symbols etched by vanished peoples in lands beyond the known world. The customs that once governed daily life fade into half-remembered fragments preserved only in the practices of scattered communities, whose connections to their origins grow ever more tenuous. Wind and weather begin their patient work of reclaiming constructions that human hands had wrestled from the living rock. Sand drifts into courtyards where fountains once sparkled with precious water drawn from hidden springs. Vines and plants find purchase in cracks between blocks, fitted with precision that would humble master craftsmen. Wildlife makes homes in chambers that once housed the treasures of kingdoms, as foxes' den where kings held court and eagles' nest where priests conducted ceremonies. Yet even as nature reclaims the spaces that humanity had hewn from wilderness, the essential achievement endures in forms that transcend the political arrangements that originally commissioned them. The facades that continue to catch dawn light, with ethereal beauty that speaks to souls across centuries and cultures. The engineering solutions that demonstrate technological capabilities, which future generations will struggle to understand and duplicate. The creative achievements that reflect aesthetic sensibilities, which will inspire wonder long after their creators' names have vanished from all remembrance. The story that began with scattered nomadic clans struggling to survive in harsh landscapes concludes not with triumph or tragedy, but with transformation, as human achievement merges back into the eternal landscape that gave it birth. The rose-red cliffs that witnessed the rise and flowering of civilization continue their patient vigil, their hewn surfaces preserving in granite the dreams and ambitions of peoples who dared to build permanence in landscapes that seemed to promise only hardship and uncertainty. In the end, the quiet that settles over these mountain strongholds speaks not of ending, but of completion, as the cycle returns to its beginning, with the wilderness reclaiming what the wilderness first provided. The structures that remain testify to the heights that human determination can achieve when vision, courage, and favorable circumstances combine to create possibilities that transform barren lands into gardens of wonder. Their legacy lives on, not in the arrangements of kings and empires, but in the enduring testament that granite provides to the capabilities of those who choose to build, rather than merely survive. The wind that sculpted these cliffs before human hands first touched them continues its ancient work, carrying away the dust of centuries while revealing new details of decorations that speak across ages to any who possess eyes to see and hearts to understand. Here, in this marriage of human ambition and natural grandeur, the essence of the Nabataean achievement finds its eternal expression, not in the temporary dominion of rulers, but in the permanent beauty of art that transforms rock into poetry and wilderness into garden of the soul.